Look, as you all saw, the United States today designated the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist group. We took this action because of their continued reckless and indiscriminate attacks on ships transiting the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. These attacks are a clear example of terrorism, violation of international law, and a major threat to innocent lives and to global commerce. Now, just a couple of points. First, today's designation targets the Houthis, not the Yemeni people. The United States remains the world's leading donor of humanitarian assistance for Yemen. We recognize that more than 15 million people in Yemen are still in desperate need of food, water, medicine. And we are taking a range of steps to ensure that these sanctions preserve the ability of aid organizations to be able to deliver all those much needed supplies. Second, this designation takes effect 30 days from now. And the reason for that is it'll give us time to work closely with those aid organizations to make sure that they understand all the ramifications of this designation, answer all their questions, and be able to provide enough context for them to have a measure of assurance as they continue to provide that humanitarian assistance. Now, look, if the Houthis cease the attacks, we can certainly reconsider this designation. If they don't, as the President said, we will not hesitate to take further actions to protect our people and the free flow of international commerce. Matt?
Thanks. John, can you talk a little bit about why the President decided not to redesignate the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, which obviously would have restricted some of that aid? Is it purely because of that humanitarian assistance piece?
Yeah, you sort of answered the question. This particular designation gives us more flexibility, but it also gives aid organizations a higher level of comfort that they'll be able to provide this assistance without running afoul of sanctions. We've already, in designating them, already issued a number of licenses. A license, as you know, is basically like a waiver. It's a carve-out when you have a sanctions regime that allows for certain goods to continue to flow despite the sanction regime. And so, yes, that's the big reason here.
We just quoted that the President could reconsider that designation should the Houthis stop these attacks. Or are you essentially using this as a bargaining chip in negotiations or public negotiations with the Houthis?
Yeah, I mean, that would suggest there's negotiations going on, and when there's no negotiations here, it's not a bargaining chip. It's a way of holding the Houthis accountable, additional ways to hold them accountable. I think, if you look at the levers of national power, there's an acronym for it, DIME, right? Diplomacy, information, military, economic. We're using all those levers of national power and, frankly, international power to try to convince the Houthis to stop these attacks. And if they don't, and they clearly haven't, to make sure that we're holding them accountable for that.
Just last one, a different topic, the meeting that's going to take place in a few minutes with the congressional leaders. We understand this is going to be focused mostly on the situation in Ukraine. Is there a version you can provide publicly? What are lawmakers going to hear from the national security staff that you have not already telegraphed publicly about what's happening on the ground?
Well, again, I don't want to get ahead of the discussion, and I suspect that in that discussion there could be some classified content that they'll discuss. But in the main, this will be an opportunity for the President and for the national security team to make sure that members of Congress fully understand the desperate, urgent need for weapons and capabilities for Ukraine to continue to flow. As you know, the last security assistance package was December 27th. There hasn't been one since. There won't be one unless or until we can get some funding. And it's not as if the war stopped just because our aid stopped. I mean, the Ukrainians continue to get attacked. They're moving into some defensive positions along that line, in the east in particular, and they continue to come under artillery shell, air attacks, ballistic and cruise missile, as well as drone attacks from the Russians. And they are expending what they have. And I won't get into their inventory lists, but there are some weapon systems for which they are in more need than others right now, and they have to expend them given ongoing combat.
Thanks. Last week, the President said it was irrelevant whether or not the Houthis were designated as a terrorist organization. Now, 5 days later, this announcement, did he need to be convinced that this was the right step?
No.
And looking back, was it a mistake to take them off of the terrorist list back in 2021? Just like consideration over these years?
No, again, the previous designation was FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization, which doesn't have quite the measure of flexibility in terms of humanitarian assistance. And so a big reason why we delisted them literally on day one was to address a dire dire humanitarian situation on the ground. And as I said today, it remains dire in many cases. The Houthis are more concerned about getting weapons and capabilities and attacking ships in the Red Sea than they are about helping to look after the Yemeni people.